75% of industrial operators experience a cyber attack in their OT environments. We really need to dispel the myth that such attacks are rare in OT. On the contrary, they're terribly common, just like they are in IT. And for sure, the research shows that the majority of operators have experienced an attack on their OT, and this on a monthly basis.
Welcome to Threat Vector, the Palo Alto podcast, where we discuss pressing cybersecurity threats and resilience and uncover insights into the latest industry trends. I'm your host, David Moulton, Director of Thought Leadership. Today, I'm talking to Qiang Huang, VP of Product Management at Palo Alto Networks, and Michela Menting, Senior Research Director at ABI Research. In this episode, we're going to explore the critical topic of OT security, or operational technology. Michela Menting, Qiang Huang, welcome to Threat Vector. Excited to have you here today.
Thanks, David. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thanks, David. Nice to be here.
Qiang, can you provide a high-level overview of the most prevalent OT threats we're seeing from our vantage point here at Palo Alto Networks?
Sure, David. Before we talk about the OT threat, I think it's important for us to understand what's going on in these OT industries across manufacturing, energy, and utility. On the business side, we're seeing profound digital transformation that is driving fundamental change of the underlying network. This could be Industrial 4.0, smart manufacturing, remote operation, adoption of 5G and cloud migration. So all of these are really dramatically increased the threat surface in the OT environment. So these legacy vulnerable OT assets that are used to be air-gapped now are getting increasingly exposed to IT and cloud. So with that, no wonder we're seeing a lot more OT threats in the industrial organizations. So some of them are even becoming worse in terms of shutting down OT operations. In our recent survey to about 18,000 industrial organizations, we see about almost 70% of them have experienced one cyber attack in the last year, and unfortunately, 1 out of 4 experienced the shutdown of the operation. So based on our understanding and the survey, the top threats can be ransomware continue to be a top concern and top threat in the OT environment. Unsanctioned remote connection is another one. Also in different parts of the world, I just came back from Europe. Nation-state attack is also a big concern.
Michela, Qiang just walked us through some of the things that we're seeing here at Palo Alto Networks. I know you've got a different perspective from your vantage point as a researcher.
Yep.
Are you seeing other areas of high concern, other things that you would want to add into some of those most prevalent OT threats?
Yeah. I mean, what we're seeing is a kind of history repeating itself a little bit, right? We had, when IT environments started coming online, started being connected, we're in that same phase now with OT, but just 20 years later, right? We've been covering critical infrastructure and kind of industrial systems for a number of years, for a good decade at least. And those patterns are becoming much more common now, much more prevalent. Unfortunately, attacks against OT are very frequent, right? And Qiang mentioned it, 75% of industrial operators experience a cyber attack in their OT environments. We really need to dispel the myth that such attacks are rare in OT. On the contrary, they're terribly common, just like they are in IT. And for sure, the research shows that the majority of operators have experienced an attack on their OT, and this on a monthly basis, right? So it's become recurring, and this repeated engagement. What it means is that threat actors they're able to achieve a frightening level of success, in their attacks. And Qiang mentioned it. 1 in 4 operators had to shut down their operations last year. So that alone should put everyone on edge, right? It's a very high level warning sign that something's not going right, and that we're not doing enough from a security perspective.
Michaela, if most of the audience isn't aware of what a OT attack or an impact on an operation, an OT operation means, can you dig into that? What are some of the real world effects of these attacks?
They can be pretty damaging. We're looking at increased connectivity. We're looking at digitization. We talk a lot about Industry 4.0, and we have been for some time. And this means there's a lot of new threat vectors, a lot of additional threat vectors in the OT. You have industrial control systems like PLCs that can have a direct connection to the internet, right? Obviously, you want to be putting that behind a VPN. You want to be putting in place firewall capabilities. You want to create separate networks. You want to separate certain OT networks from others. There should be various layers there before you get to an actual internet connection, right? So that requires a lot of configuration. And unfortunately, that's leaves a lot of space for misconfiguration as well, right? And this is something that threat actors exploit all the time. And even though we think about segmentation and we try and deploy segmentation in OT networks, and we have these number of layers that come between those OT assets and IT networks and then the broader internet, it doesn't really stop threat actors. It makes it more difficult. But what we see is, despite this layering, they continue to be successful, right, in attacking OT assets. And in part, this is because OT assets. You think about PLCs, programmable logic controllers. You don't patch them as regularly as you would an IT asset, right? And you certainly don't do that in a live production site. You don't want to be disrupting the visibility and control of a plant site or an operation. So you schedule these updates, and you might have to do them quarterly, certainly not a daily occurrence, right? Um, and so, of course, it means for a period of time, you have vulnerable industrial control systems, vulnerable OT assets. Um, and even if threat actors come through the IT or originate from the IT space, it gives them time to kind of look around and find those assets that they can exploit, right? And the research stats shows that 75% of those OT attacks originate in the IT space. And so what we're seeing is a really sharp increase in attacks against OT, because a lot of different doors are kind of opened, and sometimes left unlocked. And so threat actors target these open doors and things like routine system updates, adding in malicious code. Um,
If I play that back, it sounds like
yeah.
you've got a complex environment that, once it's compromised, puts the operator or the organization into a leveraged position. That leverage tends to lead to ransomware and or extortion. And that, because of the exposure on the IT side,
Mhm.
you've got now this type of technology that wasn't intended to be connected to the internet, and it's suddenly connected to the internet. And I guess where I'm going, and maybe Chung, I throw this to you, is there a high profile OT attack that's occurred that comes to mind? Maybe people will go like, oh, that's what they're talking about. And can you talk about some of the impacts to the industry once that occurred?
Yeah, sure, Dave. Yeah, we continue to see high-profile breaches and attacks in these industrial organizations. Some recent example, for example, the meat manufacturer like JBS, automaker like Nissan. We continue to see attacks. What's interesting is that because these OT assets are mission critical, they're revenue generating. So the impact of the bridge is also quite high. I think in manufacturing is the among the top three in terms of the impact of the bridge into multi-million-dollar. There's also recent example of Clorox, right? You saw from the news, it's about 20% decline in net sales in one quarter, which is about 300 million. So some of the examples I want to echo the observation from Kelly earlier, right, in terms of how the attacks can come from the sort of the IT side into the OT side. Couple examples, for example, one is the Ukraine attack back in 2015. We all know that it's about 200,000 people lost power for a period of time, right? it started from a phishing compromise from the IT side because of a lack of security control, lack of proper segmentation between IT and OT. Eventually, the attacks was able to come from the IT side into the OT side, and then they were able to shut down some of the OT controllers to create a big impact as a result. So these are some of the examples that speaks to how the attacks can come in. The other recent example is about this. We just heard, we saw some patterns from our research side as well. This Frosty Group attack. Again, that's impact sort of the energy company in Ukraine in the past quarters. Again, over here, it's about, I believe, one of the possible ways about some kind of unsanctioned remote access, and the attacker was able to get in, and then they were able to, again, sort of penetrate deeper into the network, and then they were able to eventually, touch the OT process and create an impact. When this impact happens, different from IT attacks, you will see a bigger impact in terms of disruption of operation. It could be even safety implications.
How frequent are cyber attacks on OT environments, according to some of our recent data?
So they're very frequent, unfortunately. Cyber attacks against OT environments. They happen on a monthly basis. The research definitely showed that monthly was probably the recurring or the highest kind of point of interaction with threat actors. But we saw quite a bit also on a weekly basis, even, and definitely quite often at a minimum on the quarterly basis. So this is not something that's once in a while or some operators. This is, the vast majority on a very frequent basis.
So, if I'm a plant operator or I'm trying to provide power or water for a city, those are my primary concerns. But what you're saying is that maybe on a weekly, definitely on a monthly basis, perhaps even more often, you're seeing some level of attack, a significant level of attack, trying to come in and disrupt operations, stop that from, stop that team from being able to deliver what they're looking for. What are some of the things that those organizations are changing or implementing to start to protect themselves? As a guy who likes to have the power on and the water on here in Texas, where it's very hot, when I hear that we've had another cyber attack here in town that is impacting things, I'm always scratching my head of what does that mean for me and what are they doing about it?
Yeah, I mean that's that's a good question. Um, I think the mindset is changing a little bit. We're still in a phase where a lot of industrial operators are clinging on to the belief that their systems are air gapped or there's security through obscurity. Right? We got to forget about that. Those days are gone. And didn't even work that well before. Now there's a very lucrative opportunity for especially cyber criminals to target industrial operations centers. And Qiang mentioned it just previously, certainly from a manufacturing perspective. I mean, that's a really successful, very hot ground for cyber criminals, right? There's some very high economical stakes. There's low tolerance for downtime. Um, a lot of manufacturers certainly don't have that regulatory pressure for security that critical infrastructure has. So there's a lot of factors that tend to make industrial operations kind of open hunting ground for threat actors,
Yeah, juicy
unfortunately.
target.
Exactly.
Cheng, what is it about OT environments that is causing them to be increasingly targeted by cyber threat actors?
Yeah, so David, if you look at these OT environment, on one side, for manufacturers, that's where they make their revenue in terms of critical infrastructure. That's where they're running mission critical operations. That's why often it could be a high outcome target for attackers. So we can break it into a few buckets. One is really financially motivated, right? We just talked about For ransomware, it could be ranged to the tens of millions when you get hold of these OT assets and then use ransomware as a way to get financial motivation achieved. It could be for some of the high-tech manufacturing. This could be espionage to steal intellectual capital from that environment. On the other side, for critical infrastructures, we also see motivations in terms of nation state or cyber terrorism that really create the impact in terms of critical infrastructure for political motivation.
How do IT-borne threats typically make their way into OT systems? This is honestly something that I've always been curious about.
Sure. Well, I mean, there's two, if you're looking at it from a very high level perspective, maybe there's two primary ways. One is, you could exploit vulnerabilities in industrial control systems, right? Build a 0 day around it, do some smart coding and maybe brute force your way in. But that's complex, requires a lot of skills. It's not everyone that can do that. The easier way and the very common way is through social engineering, unfortunately, and that is just immensely popular because it works all the time. Not all the time, but it works more often than not, right? You have email compromise, you have phishing, and threat actors are able to obtain credentials that they then use for remote access. And quite often, it starts in the IT space, and then they escalate their privileges, and there's a lot of lateral movement that happens until they can hit, those OT assets. But I think increasingly you'll see some of that happen and target directly OT, right? So they won't even need to go through the IT space to get to those OT assets. So unfortunately today, I mean, it's still very much, kind of whacking someone over the head for the password rather than trying to, crowbar their way in through, an iron door or something like that. Um, so social engineering, unfortunately, is highly prevalent and still highly successful, even against OT.
How do ICS specific attacks compromise the integrity of OT processes? And then what are some of the potential consequences of those breaches?
I think in the recent past, we observed that malware start to understand sort of the ICS, DCS control functions. As a result, they can start to really change the integrity of your process. For example, you can do a write command to tell the physical process to do different things. You can change the register value. We heard about some of the water utility attacks. Potentially, you can even change the current level of the water in the public domain. It's really scary. You could download a different program file to the machines to fundamentally tell the machines to do different things. Imagine this is in the refinery plant where you're mixing chemicals. If you mix different portion, it could really explode. So all of these are really big challenges or potential impact. When it comes to the impact, this is also again different from the sort of the IT ransomware malware. When it comes to OT, there's additional operational challenge and the impact. For example, downtime. For example, loss of revenue, penalties. For example, the safety concerns we talked about, even the physical damage to your OT assets and infrastructure. So these are some of the additional impacts when it comes to sort of ICS specific attacks and malwares.
What about some of the immediate business impacts from an OT attack? What are you seeing, Michaela?
If you're looking at OT operations, right, you have a physical process that's happening. You're manufacturing something, or you're generating electricity, or transmitting it, or treating water, right? So if you have an attack that's interfering with those operations, worse, you have an immediate shutdown. Okay, so you're stopping all operations, and operators typically tend to, if they suspect something's wrong, they'll do that preventatively. So you're not manufacturing anything, you're not generating any electricity, you're not maybe processing water, and that can have a direct immediate impact. and that costs money, right? You have to remediate, but you're also not making any money because you're not producing the products that you're then going to sell, right? So there's that immediate financial aspect right there. But then there's everything else at companies that maybe you're paying the ransomware. Maybe you got to inform regulatory authorities. Maybe you got to do a lot of incident response. Hire an external company. You need to do some marketing, some response. You need to talk to your customers. So there's a lot of there's a kind of a long tail as well, financial repercussions that happen kind of after the fact, and it could accumulate over months, over years sometimes even. And then if you're regulatory liable, it could be, financial sanctions from that perspective as well. So, it could be quite a large gamut of financial penalties that kind of occur from a cyber attack. So it's certainly not cheap.
Right. And all of those things end up, in my mind, driving to reputational damage, whether that's with regulators that no longer fully think you're doing a great job, or your customers who don't think they can count on you, anywhere in between, even the employees that are going to come in at that production or manufacturing facility and going, well, we can't work today because everything's shut down. And Qiang, can you talk about some of the main challenges that occur when trying to secure these OT environments, especially compared to IT?
Yeah, sure, David. We talked to hundreds of these industrial organizations to understand what are the top challenges. It doesn't matter what industry, the top challenge I've heard is about the lack of visibility. I don't know my OT assets. I don't know the risk. I don't know who is talking to whom. Without that, it's very hard to secure what you don't see. That's number one challenge. Then you have to realize that because of these OT operational constraints, uptimes, these are assets managed by different team. Often, the existing security tools don't quite work well on these legacy OT assets.
Hmm.
It often comes down to segmentation, but because of a lack of visibility, we see insufficient segmentation or threat prevention. Now, there are also new challenges because of this digital transformation, the new way of doing business. Two things I want to highlight. One is sort of how do I, have a visibility and the security control for all these remote operation, all these unsanctioned connections. It's a big challenge nowadays. And also, how do I secure my private LTE and private 5G networks? Most of these enterprise folks, they're not the mobile expert. So when you bring all of these together, the industry is also facing huge amount of complexity when they have to bring multiple set of tools to drive that OT security in an effective way.
Um, Qiang, how are organizations dealing with this convergence that is occurring between their IT and their OT systems and security?
It's a good question, David. I think obviously when we look at this, there's a people, process, and technology, right? I think we're seeing more and more industrial organizations. They kind of realize that this convergence because of the business need. So they're making changes in terms of how do they drive OT security. But in general, I think we're seeing more sort of a top-down guidance in terms of having consistent security for the OT environment. With that being said, we still see IT/OT collaboration is still, some way to improve. In our recent survey, about 40% of the industrial organizations still mentioned that their IT and OT teams are not fully working together. Only 12% said they're fully aligned. So this is really a challenge that the industry need to solve because your network are getting more and more convergent, and then your network is becoming more flat. So it's a critical element for us to take a look.
That's a pretty big gap if only 12% of those teams surveyed are saying that they're actually aligned on what they're trying to achieve. The threat actor doesn't necessarily care if your OT and IT teams agree. They're looking for that, as Michaela put it earlier, I'll say mission impossible way in, or more likely the social engineering way in. And that's quite frightening. Michaela, you spoke about regulation earlier, and I wonder what role does regulation play in driving some of these OT security initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, in critical infrastructure, certainly there's been accompanying regulation as that critical infrastructure often has that national security imperative, right? We see it from a sectoral perspective in energy and healthcare, but increasingly we're seeing industrial operations in general come under the purview of regulation. Certainly in Europe, which I'd say is pretty advanced in there, we've got regulations such as the Cyber Resiliency Act. We've got an update on the NIS directive, so the NIS two. And what are these regulations kind of saying? So the Cyber Resiliency Act is basically saying, secure your supply chain. You got to be resilient against cyber attacks, or else, financial penalties, personal liability, even for some of those executives. NIS two expands on what is traditionally understood as a critical infrastructure operator. Manufacturers now come under that purview, right? So they need to start paying attention to how they secure their operations. In the US, you've got executive orders coming down. We have the 14028, it includes quite a lot of measures on supply chain security. So it's kind of this rolling ball. It's going to get bigger. There's going to be a lot more pressure on a lot of industrial operators. It starts from critical infrastructure, but soon it's going to encompass a lot of different industrial operators. And that's the concern. And the research has shown that quite a lot of these industrial operators expect regulatory pressure to grow. So that's something they need to start paying attention to.
So, Michaela, you were the lead author on the State of OT Security 2024 report. And I'm hopeful that you can talk to me about some of the key things that you saw in that research, those insights that you were able to provide.
I mean, what really stood out to me was the frequency of cyber attacks against OT networks and OT assets, and the very high number of respondents that experienced a cyber attack, right? We sort of knew this was happening, but to have it reflected back in the stats, it confirmed that in a kind of frightening manner, right? Over 75% experienced, a cyber attack in the last year. 1 in 4 had to shut down operations. I mean, this is not just something that's minor or affects a minority of operations. Um, this is big and this is significant and this is kind of scary. And I think it's important that industrial operators start paying attention to what's happening because not a lot of them are going to talk publicly about it, but it's happening regardless. And no one's exempt from that. And I think that kind of finding really nailed home what a lot of people in the security industry have been saying for a long time. And you can't ignore it anymore. You really have to start facing up to that fact that you're probably going to be next. I mean, sounds scary, but that's the truth of the matter today.
So it sounds like it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And because of the importance of these industries and the amount of leverage that the attacker can get, there isn't a reasonable person who would say this is likely to slow down. Chung, what about you? What were some of the things that you really saw that stood out in this report?
Yeah, I think it's really great survey to me as a cybersecurity technology provider. I felt that the survey reinforced some of our observation in terms of the customer challenges and trend. For example, it's interesting to see 70% of respondents think 5G is going to be a big threat vector. About 75% of them think remote access is on the rise for both employees and third parties. So these are some of the trends that we also observe here. What's also a big call out for me is that as these industrial organizations are getting themselves ready and prepare themselves for the digital transformation and how do I secure that journey, the complexity I also mentioned earlier was a big call out. I think about 70% of the respondents said that they'd like to drive a bit of a tool consolidation to get ready for this converged network. I felt that we're very well positioned in this area that's aligned with our vision. So I'm pretty excited that on one side we see more challenges. On the other side, I'm pretty excited that we can provide strong solutions and capabilities to help our customers out there to navigate through this journey.
When you talk about this idea that the thing that is exciting is that we're going to be able to drive some innovation to help customers out. That is something that across the board in security, and I've noticed it working here, seems to be the underlying driving mission. And it's good to know that while the threat actors are picking up the pace or maybe targeting more often the OT environments, that there are solutions. There are ways to address this problem. So let me close with my favorite question for you both. Michela, we'll go with you first. If you could tell me, what is the most important thing a listener should remember from this conversation?
I think the top one is really you need to stop thinking that you're going to be exempt. As an industrial operator, you know, they're complex networks, Qiang said, and visibility is tricky, and finding the right solution and deploying the right solution is tricky. But it doesn't mean you can't try, and you shouldn't attempt it just because it's difficult. You need to really kind of be proactive about security rather than reactive and waiting for that attack to happen, as if you're going to think it might not happen to me. I'll wait until the other shoe drops and then I'll start doing something. No, don't think that way. Think about being proactive. Think about doing something before things get ugly. And I think that's key. You know, you can really minimize a lot of the fallout and the financial pain if you're better prepared.
I love it. That makes a ton of sense. Cheng, what is the most important thing that a listener should remember from this conversation?
Yeah, actually, I like to highlight two things, if that's okay. I think one is really in the light of all this trend, make sure that you work with your organization, work with your management to really have that top-down alignment to make OT security a key initiative. That's very important to get to that alignment, that IT/OT collaboration. Then from the technology side, right, it's really about make sure you gain the visibility of your OT environment and then think about the platform approach to really provide that holistic visibility and security at the same time for multiple threat surfaces we're observing. So that's also very important for you to be able to scale for today and also for the future.
Michela, Qiang, thank you for a great conversation today. I appreciate you sharing all of your insights on OT security and the convergence that you've seen between OT and IT, and some of the insights that you brought forward from your great report.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it. It was great being here, and I think we had a great discussion.
That's it for today. If you've liked what you heard, please subscribe wherever you listen and leave your review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Your reviews and feedback really do help us understand what you want to hear about. I want to thank our executive producer, Michael Heller, our content and production teams, which includes Kenny Miller, Joe Benacourt, and Virginia Tran. I edit Threat Vector, and Elliot Peltzman mixes our audio. We'll be back next week. Until then, stay secure, stay vigilant. Goodbye for now.